Okay, here we go. I'll call this meeting to order with a roll call attendance, or can I simply say that everyone's present?
So roll call, please.
Roll call attendance, please.
Okay, Commissioner Forster. Here. Lisk.
Here.
Nelson. Here. Petroselli.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Meyer.
Here.
Mayor Clark.
Here.
And Chairperson Montague.
Here,
The gang's all here.
we have a review of updates to RMC, Ridgway Municipal Code, Chapter 7, Planning and Zoning, and recommendation to the Ridgway Town Council.
And if I can just jump in real quick, I'm wondering if you all would be amenable to adding an item, the minutes from the regular meeting of March 28th, 2023. We inadvertently left that off the agenda. There should be a copy of those.
We have those here, yep.
in front of you. Sorry about that.
I've already read them.
Want to make a motion?
Oh,
I think if everyone's okay with that.
I'll make a motion. We approve the minutes from March 28th meeting as submitted. Second. Give it to the
John or
birthday boy.
Bill. And a roll call vote no, we're good.
All in favor?
All in favor? Aye. Motion passes unanimously.
You can share everybody's.
Anyone opposed?
Now you can say past.
Passes unanimously.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Here you go.
I think you're up.
Ready?
We're ready.
All right, good evening.
Good
So,
evening.
what's that?
Good evening.
Oh. So, super brief presentation tonight. Would rather just spend time, if you needed it, answering questions or going over any comments, final comments that you have. So the objective of tonight is to do a very brief process overview, reminding you kind of how we got here and how we did it. Taking time for questions and discussions, and then in theory, saying if you are ready to make a recommendation to town council on all of the proposed documents and proposed code amendments. So jumping right into this one, we've got kind of a reminder on what the objectives of this whole project were, and that included clarifying the zoning and subdivision review process, removing contradictions and duplication between code sections, and then also creating a structure that can easily be updated to adapt to changing trends and needs with the community. Hopefully you feel that we've met those objectives and that we are on track to keep moving this forward. We did want to remind you also that we did create that list of future code amendments for the town council to discuss. So as they have time allows or budget allows, they can go through that list and decide what is a priority to move forward with. And then those can easily be modified and put into the code as new code updates in the future.
And where is that list?
The most recent list we sent to town council, it included all of the most recent public documents. We can pass it on to you, or I can pull it up on the screen tonight if you would like.
So are we talking about the list that I had asked for about things that we should consider updating?
Yep, correct. So we have that list. The town council has seen it, and staff will keep it in town hall to have it on their kind of list of upcoming discussions. And then it's not being codified or anything, so it's not part of an adoption process. It's just kind of something to keep in the background to use when needed over there in town hall.
If I want to see it, I can just ask Preston.
It's been shared with planning.
A couple months ago, I just wondered if it had been updated since then.
Yeah, that's a good question. We did update it because as you probably saw in our responses to the public comment received, we did add some things to that list for future discussion items. So.
Yeah, so it is updated.
Correct.
So can I get a copy of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Preston, maybe you and I can work tomorrow on the best way to distribute it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd really like to see it.
Sounds good. Good question. Okay, so how we got here, we started with that kickoff to you in September which was about 7 months ago. And then this just kind of recaps the meetings that we had, that we were presenting and discussing the modifications with you, along with that scenarios work session that the community was kind of specially invited to back in January. We did go to the town council for a work session on April 12th and kind of got their nod. They didn't have any big concerns for us to write any modifications for. So everything kind of stayed on track after that meeting, which is why now we're before you with what you've seen and what you've been discussing for the last 7 or 8 months. So what we're looking for the town to actually approve, which is what you want to keep in mind of your consideration for a recommendation, is to town council. Not just chapter 7, those land use regulations, which include the applicable sections we've been going over, but also chapter 6 building regulations and chapter 8 licensing. Those 2 chapters only have been modified to remove parts out and put them in chapter 7. So there's no new language being proposed in chapter 6 or 8, but we did want to remind you that this is going to be part of the proposed change. The modifications also, when they go to town council, will include a modification to the zoning map, and that will change the industrial district names as we've discussed at prior meetings. So the
only change to the zoning map?
Sorry,
Is that the only change to the zoning map?
correct. No districts, no locations are being changed, just the name of the industrial districts. Yep.
Thank you.
Good question again. Okay, so since we were before you at March 28th, we did make some changes that were brought up by primarily a public comment, and then Russ had a couple of things he caught for us in the definition section. What you had before you in your packet tonight is the completely updated, finalized draft versions. I say draft just because they haven't been approved yet. Those did include, without showing in track changes, the changes we made. So you probably saw attached to your staff report or within that staff memo, we kind of clipped the different relevant sections we changed to make it easier for you to see what we've modified since you last saw the code. So I wasn't going to go over each one in detail, but I am happy to answer any questions that you have on it. Just let me know if you want an overview of them or if you want to ask about specifics. We did feel like these were they made sense to make the modifications, and none of them are very drastic changes in staff's opinion.
Thanks for adding that section. I think that it came up with, what's his name's, letter, but basically, thank you, Chris Hawkins. But basically, like, how will this apply to existing applications? And I read through this and it makes it really clear. Like, you don't get to straddle it and use both, how they both suit you. If you were already in progress, you can choose, right? Still, you can either use the old one or the new one. You can't use both.
Correct. You can't mix and match what they are. So,
And if your approval or whatever you're working on has expired, then you're in the new league.
correct.
Yeah, I thought that was all really clear and important.
How many subdivisions do we have in the process? And then one just left the process, I guess.
Just denied, not denied, so.
Applications or subdivisions?
Well,
Is that the one you're
applications,
saying?
yeah, I was thinking application.
There's a number of things.
There's not a bunch of them, is there?
I mean, active, with the ones that you haven't heard about in a while, the number's pretty substantial.
Oh, wow.
Between co-housing, reserve.
Oh, wow.
The guys, there's at least 7, yeah.
Nick Isaac, Ridgway Light Industrial Phase 3. Then you have Riverfront, Wetterhorn.
So 10 or 12?
This is part of it. Wow. See, I thought
This is Park Commons, which has gone through the process, still waiting to execute the plat, but that one's largely been.
That's probably a little tricky for the planning commission and staff to be working with 2 codes.
Yeah.
But I think we have a good handle on it, right, y'all?
Yes, and it's normal
Acknowledging
when
the
communities go into a new code. I know CPS at least is used to remembering to look at old code versus new code. What we like to hope is that applications will get finished up within a few months. So like a year or 2 years from now, staff members are not trying to read the old code, and by that time they're focused just on the new language.
One thing I'm somewhat worried about, worry is probably not the right word, but as soon as the code changes are codified on second reading by the town council, and even before that, I'll be in touch with Unicode to see if they can expedite the process of getting the online version of the municipal code updated. They usually have a pretty long lead time in getting the online version updated, so it'll be important. I mean, it's a huge, I mean, the zoning and subdivision regs are a huge portion of our municipal code. And it would be nice to get that, the updates reflected sooner rather than later, so.
So how would that work? If someone's in progress, they'll no longer be able to go to our website to refer to the old code because it won't be there anymore.
Correct, it won't be there anymore, so, you know, that underscores the importance of you know, meeting with staff to make sure that we can outline exactly what they need to adhere to. But anyway, fun fact for you.
So I guess questions from the commission, are you ready for that, Katie?
Yeah, as long as quick overview of timeline, we're hoping first reading at council on May 10th. That work session for development community. We are, Preston helped us with a date that we're looking at May 23rd, and then town council second reading on June 14th. And then in theory, that would give the effective date July 14th. And then my last screen for you. Yep. And then my last screen for you is just a potential recommendation motion if you chose to make it tonight.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Do you want the planning commission at the work session or not necessarily?
The developer workshop,
Yeah,
great question. Not necessarily.
3.
To be candid, I don't know why you all would want to be at another work session.
If you, to know what the expectations are.
Okay,
It would be interesting to get the developers' perspective.
Absolutely.
I'd be surprised if they show up.
I was, you do what?
I'll be surprised if they really show. So
Oh, really?
I'm only going to see who shows because they all, excuse me, complain, but don't participate. So that's my opinion.
Sure.
They should be here tonight. That's my
Absolutely.
opinion.
Absolutely.
Katie, would you go through those dates again? I missed them. May 10th is,
She can go back.
okay.
And May 23rd is a Thursday, right, Katie? Or is that a Tuesday?
It is a Tuesday. We went with a Tuesday evening.
You guys offered free beer or something, they would come.
So
We have food, they'll definitely be here.
So it's open to the public, so
Free beer.
everyone's welcome to attend, but it's not a formal planning commission.
Okay.
I'm gonna go just because I want to see who doesn't attend or who does attend. I mean, I just.
You gonna take attendance?
But we definitely plan to get the word out. We have some new communication channels with our Ridgway ad and paper and stuff. Hopefully folks are reading that. But we'll definitely try to get the word out so that. more
I
people-
think that's the case with most things, unless it's gonna, well, it directly affects them, but like, right? Four Winds was the last time we really saw a big public presence. People just want to be like, ah, yeah, they got it. Maybe that's just a vote of confidence in us.
My experience is they show up, but when it's first announced, and then they fade away through the approval and negotiation process. It seems awkward to me. They should, but I guess it's life.
Any questions on what we're approving tonight? All this work we've been doing?
Yeah, I've got a few.
Okay,
I know when we looked at this a couple of meetings ago, we talked about, we went through your table, or I did, and found some things that didn't fit. And you said, well, we're not going to throw people out if they're already there. We don't have them listed correctly. There's still some follow-on things from that are upcoming that I have some concerns about. Is now the time to do that, or is that something that we need to do at a later date?
Are you asking about certain businesses that exist right now? What will happen to them or?
Well, no, the impression I got on that was that we're not gonna throw anybody out if they're
Right.
already, they're essentially grandfathered.
Yep.
One in particular that came up was childcare facilities. And I don't remember off the top of my head what zones they were okay in, but it appears that we're gonna need them in the historic business area. especially with this new development that the Home Trust is looking to build with that child facility on Sherman at Laura. And so currently, the way the code, the table's listed, we can't put one in there. I know that that will be an issue. And there's some other things along those lines that I've run across. I don't know if now's the time to bring them up, or if we just need to go ahead and approve this and then kind of clean those up later.
I think now's the appropriate to bring it up if you want to move down the list.
Okay. Well, there's the child care facility. We need to have that historic business so that the home trust planned development can go in there.
And is that not reflected in the table? In this most current version of the table?
It is not.
Catch.
So if it's not there, it's not there right now, so it would be making a change. So as long as the town is okay with that, we can make it a permitted use in the HB.
It's just a development that I know that there's probably pretty good support behind here. I just, I don't know that,
I was just saying to John, I mean, these are already in the pipeline, so Russ is able to identify them, but there's very likely something coming along that we're not aware of. I mean, what would the process be? Wouldn't we just allow for
it would be a
exception?
zoning
Or variance.
a variance?
or a variance. Or
Variances are tough.
But-
And you can't get a variance on zoning, so that's,
Yeah, variances are tough.
We'd have to-
Hardship or that's for dimensional requirements, but I mean, this is good to have the foresight and think about all this stuff. So that's the whole purpose of these conversations. So is there kind of consensus among the board to make sure that that's accounted for in the HB zone district?
I'm comfortable with it.
Yeah, I don't see any reason why it needs to be explored. We couldn't do it.
It's also downtown district.
Yeah.
You know, that's what I was thinking. It might be covered in there, but it'd be better just to have it clear.
I'm trying to remember where that.
But when, in between, or when Russ is done with these, back to my question of like, what would the process be if he didn't mention that? And then the home trust comes in and they're like, we need to put our childcare facility in and it doesn't meet your zoning updates. What do we do?
Russ just gave you the answer. It requires a change to the code, to the regulations. If it's not listed as a use by right or a conditional use in that zoning district, the code would need to be amended to account for that.
So it would be amended in general. So if any other childcare facilities came in for that zone, then they'd be allowed, or just for that specific application?
no, for
Anything in that
change the code, so anybody coming along subsequent.
Okay,
So yeah, it's conditional use right now in residential, historic residential, mixed residential, downtown service and general commercial. And if I believe, I looked that up and that's a historic business area where that is. So we just,
It's HB, yeah.
And if it's HB, then downtown service doesn't even apply.
Right.
So I think we need to amend the draft to include daycare and HB.
Downtown service starts one block west.
yeah, right.
Are you thinking conditional use or permitted, allowed by right?
did you say all the other ones were conditional?
Everything.
Correct.
is-
Just carried over from existing code. They're conditions everywhere.
Follow suit with the other ones.
Yeah, I should probably be conditional.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The other ones I saw, let me just kind of run through these quickly and see if anybody else has any heartburn or concerns with them. One of the things I noticed is that the only housing that's listed in the future development area is single family homes.
One homes are used by right in the FD.
What's that?
I think it's one single house is a use by right in future development.
Right.
One.
Yeah, so single family homes.
Right.
Right, but there is no,
Not homes,
there is, well, a single family home. That means you could build several single family homes
no, just one residence.
in the whole FD.
Yeah,
And the whole tract is zoned there.
whatever size the tract is.
That's what I thought.
It's not one
One
zone,
and all is-
yeah,
that's my
it's-
understanding.
It's
Per lot.
per lot.
Parcel that's in it.
Sure, sure. And I know that we have development going on in FD area, very early stages. That backs up to light industrial and then the FD area behind that. Behind Cora, south of River Park there. Is that truly all we're gonna allow in there? Is single-
No, I think what you're not seeing is the history where FD is a holding.
Understood.
So anytime something comes in for development, it's by matter of course, it changes from FD to whatever zone makes sense.
Okay,
So whether it's
okay.
light industrial or.
I was just thinking of that area and thinking there's probably gonna be more than just single family homes.
Yeah, so it will get rezoned when it gets
To
developed.
mixed residential.
Any FD parcel that's come in for development has been rezoned to whatever zone is appropriate at time of development. It's sort of a simultaneous thing where it gets rezoned and subdivided or whatever process. At the same
Okay.
time.
Okay,
So FD's, in other words, not intended to be a permanent zone. It's a zone for parcels that,
that need future.
that need to be evaluated based on what the owner decides he wants to do with it.
Okay, fair enough.
He or she.
Laundromats only in industrial areas. We don't have one in town, but is that the only place we can put one?
That seems like a mistake. It seems like they've been allowed in GC previously.
Right?
Were they not in the previous code in GC, Katie?
I have it pulled up. Let me look really quick here.
Laundry, that was a special use because of this water storage.
It would be, it'd have to be conditional or something because of the water.
I had looked into building one once across the highway,
Yeah,
and it would have been permitted,
in GC.
yes.
Okay.
But the only place it shows that you can put a laundromat in the current table that they provided is in the industrial area.
And GI.
That's the industrial. So LI and GI are both industrial.
It's light industrial and general industrial is what those mean.
Which, wouldn't we have to have it in GC if we have lodging?
I would think it should be in GC at least as a conditional use.
I agree.
And it's currently not in GC. That's not to say that we can't add it.
It used to be.
It used to be.
Okay, it's not on the online code at least right now. And what I'm also wondering that I didn't dig for yet is if it's under a definition of something else. So there is a service establishment which cater to the general public. So maybe that's where it was thought to be as a laundromat, maybe.
Could be, could be. I
Okay.
just noticed we had this one on the table that says laundromat specifically, and it only shows industrial areas.
Yeah, it's under, Katie, it's under personal services, laundromat, commercial, industrial.
Okay. So conditional use in GC, you're saying?
Yeah. Thanks. I hate to be nitpicking. I just.
No, these are good.
Oh, you're good.
I'm impressed.
Telecommunication facilities is listed as conditional use in all zones. I know that we've done some actions here to try and slow down 5G deployment. And I'm wondering if by removing it from all, not necessarily all zones, but several zones, if we could help defer that deployment, if that's a motivation of the town.
The issue, it's a good point. The issue with 5G though is that when it gets deployed, it's going to get deployed in rights of way. Primarily. In rights of way, it'll be on light poles and power poles, and
Yeah.
it won't actually be on private property for the vast majority. I mean, there probably will be some on unique pieces of private property, but what's your take, Katie, about that? I think that's, I mean, what you referenced is not really talking, it's talking about like the thing out here by the public works yard that's the carrier neutral location where the fiber comes in and any carrier can go in and put their equipment in there and connect to it. That's different than 5G, which would go, if you go 5G radios on.
Yeah, they call them small cells. Town has those small cell or has small cell regulations in place.
I knew we'd done some movement to try and slow that down. I was just curious if this would be something else we could do to help that. Okay.
Yeah, I'll just add really briefly that the telecommunication facilities, the standards, including adding more for small cell to meet all the state and federal regulations, is on the list for future discussion. There's a lot of requirements where actually for small cell towns are required in Colorado to expedite that permitting process. So I would say changing it's not going to make a difference based on the higher level laws that the communities have to follow for small cell.
Understood. I was concerned about that as well. So,
Yeah.
okay. This is one we've touched on before, but arts and crafts studios are really restricted on where they can be right now. And this is an arts and crafts town.
Yeah.
And it seems like we really need to expand that zoning capability there.
I would agree.
I agree.
Yeah, I was gonna bring up especially the mixed residential. I thought was supposed to be kind of business as well, which would include arts and crafts studio. I would think.
There's that possibility, yeah.
But to allow what kind of commercial volume? I mean, just so an artist could have a studio, or are you thinking allowing them to have classes with 10 people and sales and traffic?
I'm thinking of arts and crafts studios. We can look at the definition to further clarify what that states, but being that it is a creative district and there's arts and crafts going on everywhere. You know, it seems a bit limited in the way it's presented currently.
So a brief history on that is that currently in the code, it was only allowed in the HB. And like you said, Russ, that was recognized already. So we expanded it to the 2 additional districts. So if the planning commission in town wanted to expand it to more, let us know. Right now, existing it's HB. So we did expand it to 3 based on prior conversations.
So it's allowed in HB, GC, and where else?
LI.
Yeah, general, commercial, light industrial.
And it's still allowed as a home occupation.
I was gonna say, yeah, is that conflicting the home occupation and the arts and crafts studio? Are those like 2 different things by definition, or?
Well, no, the home occupation can cover anything. It just has a very restricted size limit, and it has to be operated by people who live on the property.
Sure.
You can't have employees.
So the traffic's limited.
So I guess as.
The idea that traffic's limited by the size of the studio and the fact that only people who live on the property can work there. There's no, I don't think there's any parking requirements or anything that would relate to traffic.
What's the point of having it as a home occupation? What does it do?
Having arts and crafts studios is a home occupation, having home occupations at all.
Having it allowed in the code, like I have a studio and like I do art in my garage, like, do I need permission?
Yeah, if we didn't have a home occupation section of the code, it would be illegal. What you were doing.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the home occupation.
I mean, actually, that's probably going too far. If you're just doing it as a hobby and you're not selling it, you're not having people come in and.
It's not an occupation.
Yeah, then it's not an occupation.
Yeah, nobody
If you're
buys
doing it as
art,
a-
you just make it for the hell of it.
I have a stained glass studio in I still have a studio. I did a bunch of work out of that studio. People would come,
Yeah.
order work and pay for it. That's home occupation. If you ever have people come in and talk to you about a dimension and order a piece, that's a home occupation. If you just are doing ceramics as a hobby, then it's not a home occupation, it's a hobby.
And I was just using that I'm not worried that I'm in violation of
I
the
understand.
code. I'm just trying to
Clarify,
understand the
yeah.
point.
I mean, home occupations are key. They're like a huge part of.
So that's like a live work situation. We're making it work.
Yeah, there's specific criteria. You have to have a sales tax license, stuff like that. So just.
The signage is very limited.
Are you allowed to hold classes for multiple people?
I'm not sure it's addressed. I did classes in my studio. and,
Only as many that'll fit.
Well, I'm worried about the neighborhood being impacted by,
Traffic.
You know, to me, that's one of those classic cases where you can over-regulate into trying to address things when things are better dealt with through nuisance codes. If somebody's overdoing their home occupation in their classes and the neighbors complain, then you say, I'm sorry, you gotta scale back your classes.
I agree with John.
If I can just jump in and answer that question, one of the criteria for a home occupation is that only the residents of the dwelling unit may be engaged in the home occupation, so.
Can't have
I interpret
employees.
that-
Do you think that-
I kind of interpret that to mean you can't have a class,
Oh, interesting.
but
Busted.
I'm not.
Well, you can't have a class, you can't have employees, but then in the downtown service area, you can have employees, and so downtown service area kind of expands. on
Yeah,
that.
that's a different.
Yes.
deal.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
So that kind of a step up from this
I
home
guess
occupation.
you could argue that engaged in the occupation is actually working for,
Yeah,
Taking a class.
taking a class isn't really
right,
engaged.
so
So it's.
that's
Maybe
not-
couldn't hire an assistant is what I would take that as,
Correct.
Unless they live there as well.
unless you let them
You
move in.
can have your wife or your kid or your roommate work there, but you can't have somebody that comes from out.
So if you live in mixed residential and you live there and you want to sell your art stuff downstairs, it'd be home occupation, or it wouldn't be considered an art studio?
Correct. Well, at least in the residential zones, that's the way we dealt with it.
Can I just jump in real quick? Because we can get down rabbit holes all night on this and.
Oh, I had one identified.
What it comes to though is, because, and here's the thing I want to make sure that we're all understanding. There's a difference between the primary use of a property and the zone district that the property is located within. And you have to look at both of those in order to determine what you're all talking about. So, because we've been hearing home occupation in a commercial zone district.
No, that's not what we're talking about.
Well, no, that's what I just heard. I heard a home occupation in the downtown district. And so,
How would you say?
I said mixed residential.
Mixed residential.
yeah, so, but I want to be clear because there's what you do is you look at the zone district, you look at the activity of the proposed activity, what's the primary use? If the primary use is residential, then home occupations come into play.
Right.
If the primary use is not residential, it's a commercial use, then the arts and crafts studio comes into play in those particular instances. And that's how we start following the decision tree down. So, so home occupation is solely strictly tied to a residential unit and that, therefore that district. So I just wanted to be clear, and it doesn't talk, I'm just looking at it right now. There's nothing in here that, I mean, there are some that say you can't have, invasive, noisy things. But in general, the home occupation does not talk about what you can and can't do as a home occupation. It sets essentially performance standards. It says you have to meet these guidelines only, right, to meet that intent of that zone district or that use. So.
Right. I think that makes sense. Does everybody follow that?
So, yeah, I
I mean,
think,
the only gray area is the mixed use. I mean, but that's the mixed residential allows for some commercial, so that takes the home occupation out of the picture. That's the way I see it.
right. Okay, so we beat that one too long, but sorry for that.
So we have to, to sort of call the question, does everybody feel like having arts and craft studios allowed in HB, GC and LI enough, or do we want to allow it elsewhere? Allow them elsewhere. I think it's probably not.
It's probably okay, as long as home
Combined with home
occupation is still
occupation.
on the plate, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Couple more. Manufactured homes only allowed use by right in historic residential. And just manufactured homes, I went back and looked at the definition on that. So Wetterhorn is manufactured homes. And so I'm concerned that that's going to become a more prevalent option as a building opportunity here. And the only place it's allowed right now by right is in historic residential. Is that?
Seems like it should be allowed in mixed use.
Mixed residential.
Yeah, mixed residential.
If I may, TJ, Katie, I believe Wetterhorn Homes fits the definition of factory built housing, not manufactured home. Can you talk to that, please?
That's what I was going to say too.
Sorry, Katie, did you want to, this is. somewhat one of my
Draw
areas
straws,
of
you get this.
specialty. No,
I think
sorry,
you know
I
more
didn't mean
about this
to.
one. You're totally
Yeah.
good.
So let's just talk a little bit more holistic, because Katie, we might need to make some changes to this. I don't know. There are 3 types, excuse me, of construction. Those that follow the International Building Code, and if it's a residential home, the International Residential Code. Then you have things that follow HUD, Housing and Urban Development Standards. And then you have everything else, things that are not built to any of those. Okay. When we talk about the first, things that are built to the international codes, those are considered, those are allowed essentially, especially single family homes. Manufactured homes, what the statutes require and Fair Housing Act requires that if it meets the definition of manufactured home through HUD, which means that it's built to their standards, it has to be viewed as a single family home. So essentially what that means is that manufactured homes by definition need to be allowed in any zone district that a single family home is allowed in. So Katie, we just need to make sure that that's correct. What you're referring to, Preston, is correct. There's this modular type home. But I also don't want to necessarily get too caught into the weeds, if you will, because those homes are actually built to our IRC standards. They're built in a factory, built to the point where they're inspected and signed off on some things, and then they come and get put on the slab and put together on site and are further inspected against the IRC. So you can talk about a whole slew of types of things, right? A perfect example is tiny homes. Tiny homes is somewhat of a misleader because it insinuates that it's a small home. It doesn't talk about how it's being constructed. Frankly, if it's a 450 square foot home that's built to IRC standards, that's not technically a tiny home, that's a home because it meets the building code requirements, unless there's some other size requirement. So it's how it's being built and the codes that it is built to. And in that case, you have 3 options: HUD standards, international codes, building codes for commercial, and residential codes for residential, or no codes. And so that's how you kind of have to look at all the types of housing. So hopefully that helped. Modular homes built to the IRC are single family homes, per definition.
And so what you're saying is by that definition, that's what Wetterwood is.
Correct.
Modular home. Okay. There's, they also carry that manufactured home template with them. So therein lies the confusion. So.
Correct.
Okay.
I think there's always going to be confusion between the kinds of things that are being built now in developments like Wetterwood homes and good old fashioned double wides and single wides, that people are always going to be.
Right. And I saw that
changing a bunch going forward. Both of those.
And you saw that Log Hills, it involved in litigation, paying off for.
Yeah.
For their,
That's even, I think that was about those storage containers that people are using to make homes out.
No,
no,
that
that
was
was Copper
Copper Creek.
Copper Creek is suing them and they're settling and paying them for defamation. It was on the front page of the paper a couple of months ago. It was really interesting article. I bet you could, look it up in the Plains Dealer.
Plain Dealer, online.
Yeah.
Archives.
I kind of agree with Russ. I think the modular home manufactured housing should be allowed in MR.
More than just, the only place we've got it listed right now is used by right is in HR. So historic residential. So
I think it should
it
be.
sounds like we need to expand that maybe, or at least.
I mean, why wouldn't we allow it in all residential zones if it meets code? I don't understand.
And I think that echoes what TJ just said. So we have all the definitions in place accurately for chapter 9, but we need to make manufactured homes to match we'll have a match single family dwellings per zone on the land use table.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie. Okay, few more. So I know I'd asked for this several times before, and I actually did find it. It's talking about the monolithic buildings in varying heights and fronts and so on and so forth. And it is in there. It's in the old code under architectural standards. It's in the new code under architectural standards. But where I kept getting thrown off was when I went to UROD, it had its own specific write-up about that was maybe a little bit more stringent, but very much in the same lines. So I'm curious if in fact it's an architectural standard, do we need to include it in the UROD as well? Or is it just an architectural standard that applies everywhere? And if you want specifics under UROD, it's the letter N is November 6th, C, Roman numeral 4, B.
Well, and what, I guess that before we go further, I would say, we have residential design standards and we have commercial design standards. I believe we have,
This was just in the architectural standards, and I think it applies to both,
okay.
actually.
Well, I think it should apply just across the board.
And that was my point, was where I kept seeing it was in this UROD area. And I was like,
And it's
we need
different
to
there?
expand this.
Yeah.
Well, it's expanded by being in the architectural standards.
Huh.
So the
UROD
question
has
is,
some special dimensional requirements.
there is a specific about no more than 50 feet,
Right.
which is different. But it also approaches the monolithic and the variance in
Fenestration.
fronts. Yeah. And so I'm just curious if we actually need both of those, or if the architectural standards can carry the majority of them. We can still keep the 50 feet in there for UROD specific, but because that's not in the architectural standards, but the whole monolithic appearance and whatnot is in there.
What do you guys think, Katie and TJ?
So I might be misunderstanding. I'm seeing under residential design, the architectural standards that would apply for any residential development in town, not just in UROD, that has buildings shall avoid monolithic shapes and surfaces, etc.
Right.
Okay, so is that, you feel like that's, you need more than that, is what you're saying?
No, I was, the only place I had originally seen that was in UROD. Seeing that in the architectural standards, I feel is good. I guess the question is, do we also need it called out specifically in UROD? Because it's in that section in all those letters, numbers I gave you a minute ago, it's specifically called out in UROD, but it's the only other place other than the architectural standards I saw it.
Yeah, we have it in HB also, we kept in there because that had a special one for the third story. I'm just skimming through here quick. Looks like TJ might have a little background on this since he popped on, or no?
I was just going to talk about the structure of it, that the way we've laid this out, and I'm trying to find the actual structure. So Katie, correct me where I'm wrong. We have under supplemental regulations in section 4 zoning regulations, we have architectural standards. Under there, we have general architectural standards. And then we have architectural standards that are specific to residential, architectural standards that are specific to commercial. Now, again, those apply, because of the construct, apply to anything, anywhere in the town. The UROD applies only to the UROD, and those go on top of each other. So I guess, and maybe Katie, we can look at that real quick and see if there's conflict. But it's one of those things where if they conflict, then the more strict applies. So I guess in that case, I'm just saying that I don't know that there's a concern that it's in both places. Probably one of the things that we might want to put in a to-do list of looking at the URAD and seeing if we do want to kind of ratchet those up a little bit. Design standards, but I think for the time being, it's not necessarily harmful in how it's designed right now.
Yeah, not harmful. Just trying to make sure that we needed it in both places. Okay. In that whole UROD area, very close to where I just called out before, there's something about ensuring that we have wildlife movement corridors. That's the only place I specifically saw that called out, and I'm curious if we need to implement that in other areas as well. Seems like that was part of the reason for turning down the Four Winds, was that they didn't accommodate that. So I'm just curious if we need to expand that to more areas or not, and what everybody's take on that would be.
I think it needs to be by the river because the animals need to get to the.
Yeah, the
water.
riparian, yeah.
All the animals go to the river, not all the animals go to Four Winds. Of course, the Four Winds probably think they do, but they don't. But I mean, 30 years ago when I came to Ridgway, there used to be just a train of deer coming down off of Vista Terrace right down that ridge to the river every
I think
night.
you still do.
It was like a slaughter, about 100 yards of deer slaughter there every night. And so the wildlife is going to travel to the river, and I think the UROD protects that. I don't think we need it anywhere else.
Fair enough.
And I will just add for a little reassurance that the referral process that's in here, if something looks like it would be potentially in a migration area or a wildlife corridor, CPW could be referred under the referral process, especially for like site plans and subdivisions. And then they would be able to provide the town any specific feedback on that area.
Sure.
Yeah, that'd
Sure.
be with the agency, notification. Yeah,
As part of the application.
as part. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. All right, two more. That's all I've got. Two.
You're good, you're good.
You said two.
Yeah.
Two
you said
dollars.
a few.
Yeah,
I was suggesting,
Nobody's counting.
Doing great, keep it up.
I've had some discussions with you and TJ on this and Preston, and I don't really know where we need to go with it and if it's something we need to address here tonight, but we have the fact in here that there's, on the ADU section, there are no tap fees if you're building quote unquote long-term rental ADU. The way that's structured, I think, is not appropriate because you can get that and then theoretically, the next owner could come in and turn it into a short-term rental. And so we've lost out on revenue from the tap fees. I'm not sure that there's a good answer for that, and I'm not sure we need to address it here. But there is actually a provision in the ADUs that says, if you're going to use it for short-term rental, well, therefore it's not an ADU. So I think our code's miswritten to a point.
I've been arguing that for years, that the way we last made the code adjustments about ADUs and short-term rentals, we screwed up by allowing ADUs to be referred to as short-term rentals if they meet certain criteria. And at that point, they're not ADUs anymore.
Right.
That's my
My concern as well. Yeah.
It's always been my concern. So I
And
think,
so
I
that
think
may be something we need to address at a later point, but I think that's a planning commission follow-up that we need to look at.
I think that was something we talked about already. It was something that was outside the scope of what we've been doing here. And so it's on our list for fixing next, right?
I think that is on the list, but I just want to add, we have a definition for an auxiliary dwelling unit. Short-term rental isn't defined as a specific type of dwelling unit in the code. So, you know, on the flip side of things, for sake of argument, even if it's being short-term rented, it's still an auxiliary unit, it's a primary dwelling unit, and it fits the definition of an ADU. So I think we do need to have a hefty conversation about that. But in the scenario you presented, Russ, the mechanism that the town has to recoup the tap fees is if the property changes hands and the property owner wants to short-term rent the ADU, they come to the town for a short-term rental license. We don't grant the license until they pay the appropriate tap fee amounts. So they have to pay those tap fee amounts if they want a short-term rental license.
Okay.
And it's actually Karen who administers that. She doesn't want the job. So,
What I would argue is that if what we, for sake of discussion, we want to call an ADU that meets the requirements for being a short-term rental. In other words, it's on a parcel that would otherwise allow for a second structure, not a second accessory structure, but a second structure. Then it's no longer an accessory dwelling unit. It's a second primary dwelling unit. You could call it an accessory dwelling unit because it's being used to be rented short term, but it doesn't require, because it's built on a property that could have a duplex put on it or two separate homes. It's no longer accessory. It's
Just a unit.
Yeah, so that's the thing that I've always tried to wrap my head around and get into the code somehow, because it's accessory dwelling units to me are only on parcels that wouldn't otherwise allow a second home, second residential.
It's not zoned for a duplex.
Right, it's too small.
Right.
Now, things have probably changed since we made adjustments to the zoning regs that allowed for much smaller minimum lot size and 25 instead of 50 lot frontage and things like that. But I still think there's a way to write it so it's really clear that if it's a structure that's being used as a short-term rental property, it's no longer an accessory dwelling. It's just another dwelling unit.
I think we should have a special session on ADUs.
We need to know.
I want to just say that I'm adamantly opposed to ADUs being allowed as short-term rentals, period. And that clears this whole thing up.
Karen?
Just want to mention accessory dwelling units cannot be larger than 800 square feet.
Of living space.
Right.
Right.
So, and we definitely look at it as a use, not a structure.
Okay.
When we're administering.
I think.
Well,
we should
my
vote on
understanding
ADUs.
with the tap fee was that if you weren't tapping into the water and sewer separately, if you were going with which was already on the property, that was why you didn't have to pay an additional tap fee. If you
That
were,
was the concept.
It's more complicated than that, though,
Okay.
because the original.
apparently is what I'm getting.
The original, I'll give you an example of the original intent of ADUs was to take a property like, well, my property isn't a good example
Mine,
because it's
maybe.
bigger than 2 lots.
Mine's 2 lots.
Is yours 2 lots? Okay, so you could have a primary structure, and in the old days, it was always like, well, you have a garage too, you can build an 800 square foot living space on top of the garage, rent that out. In the past, before the ADU potential was written into the code, to build another structure on a lot, you had to buy another water and sewer tap fee, a whole nother water and sewer tap.
But when the ADU definitions came into place, they had to be part of the original water tap and house.
Yeah, you could create an ADU, you wouldn't even necessarily have to pay.
No separate utilities,
You're
no
right.
separate water.
You could just,
No separate water, you have separate
Right.
electric.
yeah, but but water and
But no
sewer,
water.
you pay. Your original tap was adequate to cover that
Yes.
ADU, and I don't even think initially we had the extra fee for like and what is it now? It's like
The rental
2/3.
usage.
Basically, it's a service fee and a half. If you're paying $114 a month for your single family residence, you're gonna pay $114 plus half.
Plus half of that.
But that's a monthly fee, that's not a tap fee.
Right.
That's
Correct.
a
That's
user
exactly.
fee. Those are the user fee.
And then on top of that, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you want to do a short-term rental, you have to go back and pay a percentage of the water and sewer tap fees. You have to pay thousands of dollars.
Correct, whatever the value of the current tap is, right now in the code, you pay 10% of that.
10%.
You only pay 10% of 12.
That's the fee you pay. if you
That's the
want.
fee you pay to do a short-term rental.
Yeah, I'm against short-term rentals and ADUs, I'm gonna say that.
Okay, well,
So again, I didn't-
if anything, this points out, we need to have a whole other discussion.
Yeah.
Get into the weeds.
10%.
All right.
Positive, I will let you know that section 7 placeholder we created, we have in there based on your comments in another meeting, accessory dwelling units shall not be used for short-term rental housing.
Thank
So
you.
that will give, and we actually have a comment next to it that it needs to be discussed further based on existing language. So I think that will help you remember to stay on track with that one as you talk about affordable housing in general.
In case the whole board gets wiped out, that comment will move forward.
It's still there. It's right in the document that
Yeah,
everyone's
There's one
seen.
about ADU.
Yeah.
That's right.
So, okay,
Like,
What else you got? One
last one. The square foot calculations, and what do we use those for? And the reason I asked the question is there's a growing concern, at least on council, to require net zero as a build factor here. In order to do that, you end up having to insulate more than IRC requires, potentially. Therefore, your square footage gets reduced, usable square footage gets reduced.
Livable square footage.
And my understanding is that the square footage calculation is based off the outside of the 2x4 or whatever structural members are.
Exactly.
And so if there is in fact a move towards net zero, and we over insulate, quote unquote, our structures, we lose square footage. So if I'm trying to build an 800 square foot ADU and I'm having to make foot thick walls in order to get the net zero capability out of it, I'm not really providing an 800 square foot unit.
Wow.
You understand my
Yeah,
concerns?
that's a really interesting.
I think in the real estate industry, they measure by livable square footage.
Yeah, I thought that.
And then by usable square footage, it's the way it's appraised, it's the way it's loaned on, that's the way it's in the industry, it's livable square footage. And livable square footage is not under a 7-foot staircase, they have ways to define that. And that's the way it's appraised. And I think it's inaccurate or inappropriate to use the outside wall, especially in this times when we're starting to get foot thick walls or more.
Right, exactly. And so I guess the question is, maybe Preston's got the answer on this, but how do we calculate that today? Is it truly the outside of the structural member, or is it livable square footage?
I think it depends on where we're calculating it for. What we're calculating it for.
Yeah,
So again, this may be something we need to go back and look at, but it's.
because if it's lot coverage, you want the outside dimensions of the
Right.
structure. If it's usable square footage, you want the interior.
Well, if it's an AD, if you want 800 square foot, it should be a livable area. Livable area is really well defined in the real estate industry. So like a closet's not livable area and stuff like that. So we need to tighten that up, I think. Probably not tonight.
Probably not
I
tonight.
mean, my inclination is to say, we've always gone based on livable area, but I really don't know the answer to that. I don't know if TJ or Katie would like to chime in on that.
It's going, I believe, off the Unified Building Code. Their definition is gross floor area. So I was just doing some quick searching of some other codes and things, and everyone has gross floor area from the external wall. I definitely see what you're saying, though. If you're talking about floor area, and maybe that could be a future discussion of livable area for certain things. But typically you want to kind of match that uniform building code. So it would come down to actually changing the requirements for different things for livable floor area.
Okay, so it is potentially an issue that we need to look at further.
So your question on this comes from the definitions section, is that right? Where did you pull that?
Actually, from an architect who told me that square footage was based off the outside of the structural number, and so.
I think in some cases it's measured from the outside, but in others it's not. That's the interesting thing.
And
For
so-
example, for an ADU,
It's
so
measured
you're allowed 800 square feet of living space, that's
livable
inside.
space.
Well, does it qualify that as living space, or is it 800 square feet?
It's 800 square feet of livable space, right? Karen?
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Sounds like my concern has been addressed.
Well, I think it's something to put on the parking lot, or whatever we want to call it, that something we need to look at.
The docket,
It's not being misinterpreted where we don't want it to be.
are you done?
Truly, I am done.
I have one. We talked about this a little bit before, and then we talked about that house that just popped up on Charles Street that's all metal on the exterior. And the fact that there was nothing in the code that was going to limit that, even though the planning department tried to persuade the owner not to do all metal. And so you added in a percentage, I believe it was 20% could be allowable in a metal on the outside. And I think that if that's correct, that number's low.
You think it should be more than 20%?
I think it should be more. I think we should
that-
have a percent, but I think 20 is too low.
I think 20 is too low.
Yeah.
Is that where it still is, Katie?
And I
20%.
can't,
Is that in the design standards?
Residential design standards.
Yeah, I think 20% is too low.
I think
I
that
think
50 would be reasonable, at least 50.
I'm okay with 50, but I don't want it all in one wall. I'd like it to be a percentage, 50% of the total, you see what I mean? And not all one side, you know, or maybe limit the front not to be more than 25% metal, but the back could be more metal. And I think we need to look at that. I think it's just the total percentage of the siding is an inappropriate way to address it.
Katie, you guys are the pros in this. How do other communities address this?
Usually I would say 20%-ish. I've never seen anyone break it down based on which wall it is. I would actually caution that because in another community, we've had neighbors complain because the back of a structure that reflected on their property they complained was metal. So I don't think you want to allow anywhere to be a lot of metal. I don't know, TJ.
We don't allow reflected metal on it.
So 20% is kind of fairly standard across communities in your experience?
A lot of people don't have a number, but that makes it hard to go with. So TJ, I think, did some research on this one and has more knowledge.
Well, this is a struggle because this is certainly where you can overregulate, and it doesn't necessarily make life easier. So we get into guidelines, I guess, is kind of what we, I don't know if I call it best practices or another consideration, right? Because what you have right now are essentially standards that are in the code and codified. It says thou shalt do these things. Your current regulations, again, just we move things are pretty lax, if you will, and we're trying to fill some things in. So this is one of those areas where I'd be really hesitant to even get too much further into providing some guidance and without kind of a discussion, because I don't necessarily disagree with anything that's being said. It's more of a conversation of, okay, if we want to, how far do we want to go in regulating design? And then those always have a yeah, but effect, if you will. Design is so subjective, and I can guarantee you, no matter what someone is going to say, it's going to be an argument, if you will, at the building permit side. And even if we got very prescriptive, 20% on each square foot at each elevation. What's an elevation? What counts for the square footage? It just gets really kind of wonky. And
I just want to increase the allowable percentage to 50.
Yeah,
I think 50 is too high. I would say 30 or 40.
What if somebody wants to go halfway up with metal?
What if?
John,
I think halfway up would be ugly.
Well, I have halfway up and I don't think it's ugly.
my point exactly.
40 is adequate.
I know, I can think of, I've just been here thinking about several houses in the HR zone that are at least 80% metal.
Yeah.
The recent structures. So I think to just from the standpoint of what we have allowed, I think it would be overly prescriptive to say, 20%, no more than 20%. I agree with Michelle. I think at least 50%. If it's, if we're talking about fenestration and not having, it's where the monolith comes in, et cetera. And I think you can tastefully do 50% quite easily. But I would not want to see it less than 50%.
I agree.
Thank you.
I agree.
Well, I still disagree, but we can.
Well, can we vote on it?
Disagree.
How do we resolve that?
I still think that if the pros are recommending 20%, they say that that's what they're finding in their research. And I think that
You said some places don't have any.
They can go about the price of all-
So
We don't know.
We don't have collective model.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
right.
want 50.
Well, what price think you want, you like 50?
Well, I mean, it just,
I'm okay.
I feel it's already a standard in town, especially like I said, if you go to River Park, there's a lot of metal on those 50% easily.
You
You
know,
don't have to paint it, you don't have to stain it, you don't have to
and from a
replace it with
practical
rocks.
standpoint, in a climate like ours, you probably would eat up your 20% by having skirting around the bottom of your structure.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah, so
It was hard.
you know,
I
so
mean, I went with metal and stucco because of fire risk. I would have put more metal in, I could have. But
Well, do we have to put a percentage?
we are, the reason
We
the
have
whole
a
percentage came around is because we didn't have one. We didn't have a maximum, so people could do the whole house in metal, which seemed like too much. And so we wanted to limit how much they could use, but I feel like 20% is too limiting, so I'd like it to be 50.
I agree, there's too limiting, and if the majority here want to go with 50, I'm okay with that.
Let's go with 50.
Yeah.
50 is-
As a maximum.
Yeah,
I'm okay with that. But it's some kind of wording about non-reflective.
we already have that.
it's already,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we already have that.
So, at the risk of prolonging the conversation, just a clarifying question. Is the concern or the discussion point truly metal? Or is it the type and mix of materials?
Metal.
Metal.
no,
Okay. Then I will not prolong the conversation.
Smart man.
So we're clear on that we can change that number?
Yeah, what I'll have to do, which isn't a big deal, I'll rewrite the whole sentence wherever that in each design district, because right now we say exterior metal siding is not allowed as the primary material. It can be a secondary accent, but if we're saying 50%, then that doesn't sound like a secondary accent material to me. So I think we'll just have to reword that clause in each spot. So.
Okay. That's the only one I have. Anybody else? Karen's got her hand up.
I do, I'm sorry, I need to say this for the record, I misspoke when I mentioned the fee for the short-term rentals on the tap charge. That's 30% of the current value, I don't know where I
That's like, I got it, but that's fine. Thank
I was
you.
like, wow, that's cheap.
Yeah, right.
cool.
So
I have a question, thinking back to Russ's comment about manufactured and modular homes and all that. If they're allowed in the historic residential district, do we then try and manage the design through the application process? So we don't put a hyper contemporary looking building in an historic district? And I'm asking because I don't know.
I don't think do you know? Bill looked like this.
I didn't. What was the question? I'm sorry, just.
So Russ earlier had brought up this question about his concept, his discussion was about the actual building codes for manufactured and modular and structured homes. And since they meet international building codes, yes, they're allowed anywhere that that meets those standards. My question was, if they're allowed in historic residential district, do we try and control the design through the application process? So we're not putting a hyper modern building in what we've called designated a historic district? And I'm asking because I don't know.
I don't think we control that, nor do I think we should.
the historic residential and the historic business has been about lot size
Yeah,
historically.
exactly.
And it's not about design.
It's-
It is misleading. I've often thought about that, but never vocalized it, but it was always where it was the most dense. It was the historical, like they had the 25-foot lots and those different lot sizes
Okay,
and different, and the HB had different uses.
yes,
So, but it's never been like an historically designated building.
okay, that was my question, thank you. I'm good.
Actually, 25 years ago, when Don Batchelder was the town manager,
The emperor,
I asked him about And I had just bought a little Victorian house and I was feeling pretty full of myself, having renovated it. And I said, have you ever thought about doing an architectural review board?
Yeah.
And he said, can you think of any place that has an architectural review board? And I said, well, there's Aspen and there's Telluride. And there's, and he went, Breckenridge. Can you afford to live in those places? You know, so it's, we can't get into requiring design, you know, homogeneity. Sort of thing.
No, I just
Like
brought it up
theme park or
because
something.
places that have like a lot of historically designated buildings, they will often try and manage that. That's all.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm sorry, what? No problem.
just trying to get.
Done. Thank you.
Does anyone else have comments?
I have a question about the process flowcharts. The process flowcharts has the let's see, staff report is usually like step 5 and step 6. Then there's notification, and then there's the next step is PC decision. Now this, I guess my question is, where are we doing the give and take and negotiation and a back and forth with the applicant? In this kind of implies that everything's building up to this with the application submittal, the pre-application meeting, the completeness review. Everything is it is flowing in that one direction. I guess my question is, where does it where do we go back and forth with the applicant? And I guess it implies that, you know, we just make a decision based on, you know, what's presented, and there's no narrative that says, you know, we will discuss criteria and, you know, various design things, density, etc. I guess I just don't see that in the flow charts.
Are you looking at table 4.1?
In any of the flow charts.
So there are flow charts for all the different applications.
Correct.
I think I understand your question, and I'll let Katie or TJ correct me or just add on to what I'm saying. If you're referring to the steps of, you know, the traditional subdivision procedure, what I would call the traditional subdivision procedure, my understanding of these flow charts is that this is the process to follow for each of those steps.
Right.
And again, that was just taking the subdivision procedure. If you're talking about, you know, the PUD zoning piece, because I heard you saying going back and forth, negotiating with the applicant, you know, that I can't find the PUD flow chart, but it kind of lays out the process that the applicant needs to take before it gets to the planning commission. That forum is the appropriate time to have that back and forth, I think you're talking about.
Wouldn't that include us or simply staff? You see what I mean? I just don't see where there is a step in there before the PC decision step that has, even if it was some narrative description about, meetings, meetings for settling negotiable points. I guess the implication with the process flow chart is that it's done, one step, one meeting, and
I think you have to,
that's kind of an unfair implication to a developer to say, well,
Bill, can I just address, I think, sure, the thing you're talking about is the fact that these things are always written out as the ideal process.
Yeah, very linear.
Yeah, it's like, if everything before it gets to us is done the way it should go, in other words, the developer meets with staff, meets with the planning team, they go have a back and forth, they talk about their questions, and then, the question to the planning commission gets presented to us. And if everything's copacetic, everything's in line, we discuss it, we go, yeah, that looks good, yeah, that looks good, yeah, I think you've done a good job there. And we have a motion to approve or recommend approval, and on you go. The reality is that you're talking about, is that it's never that simple. But you don't write that into the process, because the process, I mean, how would you write that into the process? So for example, let me finish. For Four Winds, planning commission, it got to planning commission, it stayed at planning commission for 11 months, right? It got continued 4 times. We had lots of back and forth. That's in that section that I'm looking at in table 4.1. And how else would you describe that other than just, in that particular case, there was a lot of back and forth. There was a lot of discussion of.
I guess I was trying to look at this from the perspective of a potential developer. And what I would like to see somewhere with the PUD, especially the PUDs, PUD section, is even if it's just narrative, that it will likely take a number of meetings to sort out issues that the planning commission might have. Yeah, I mean, I understand that there's going to be a lot of back and forth, but it would be useful to the public and to potential developers to actually admit that there's going to be some back and forth of some sort, or just even if it's just narrative.
That's a great point. Just jump in. An element to this whole exercise are the end products that we're going to get from Katie and TJ. Some visual representations of these processes. Our Clark brought up the best example of Four Winds. If you had a flow chart for Four Winds, there'd be like a reverse over and over again. But you make a really good point about, the flow charts in here are very linear and step by step, but I think the end products and some of those visuals that Katie and TJ will, actually TJ already has, I think a good portion of it put together. They'll go into some more detail and try to provide a more visual representation of what you're talking about. How it's not always clean and linear, right? It sometimes takes several rounds, sometimes many rounds of conversations and revisiting and public forums. So I hope that helps.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'd add is that, one of the things I really like about what we've done throughout this long process of redoing chapter 7 is the idea that we're making PUDs a whole lot less attractive. And hopefully there'll be much fewer and farther between, and everything else will go through a more streamlined described process. And I agree with Preston. I think we'll get some deliverables from this process with TJ and Katie that sort of lay out examples of how the process goes. I'm totally in favor if these guys think it makes sense to put something in the verbiage of describing the process that says there may be a lot of back and forth, something to that effect. But you know, the other thing I'd say is that in my experience over all these years, most developers are pretty familiar with how the process goes, and they know that there could be a lot of back and forth and a lot of revisiting of issues. But I think your point's a good one that at least needs to be considered.
Right. Cool.
I had a couple of questions and a couple of clarifications. So for table P51 and 7.5, that table. If you look down at the planning commission all the way down to right of way vacation, there's nothing in that box, but if you read down below, I think it says that the planning commission is involved in the process. So I think that was.
I'm sorry, Jeff.
The right-of-way vacation item at the end of that chart, 5.1. And it's the section 5 document.
So it's in Dropbox, it's 6 RMC chapter 7. And we're on page 1.
Page
Page 2.
I'm following you here. I'll double check that. Thank you. That's a good catch.
and then I just want to touch back on that mixed residential. So when I read the page 32 of the 89-page document, the land use table.
Which document are you in? Still 5?
No, sorry, chapter 4 or chapter 7, section 4.
Section 4, okay.
And then
What page?
page 32, it talks about mixed residential. And when you read the intent of mixed residential here, it talks mainly about different mix and variety of housing types. And it definitely talks about housing and having more dense housing. But when we had discussed having this, when the planning commission first started talking about having a mixed use residential area, we were talking about having a mixture of housing and work area. So I was just confused. It's confusing, a little bit confusing to me, especially looking at the land use table, that it looks like that we're allowing the housing, but we're not really supporting the business part. And I guess I got kind of confused because at first I thought that the arts and crafts studios should be allowed under mixed residential, since it should be mixed business. But as I'm reading these definitions, it looks like it's more for the intention of building more dense residential. So, for example, the reason why I brought it up was, for example, when Jack came to talk about this area right across the highway, they were talking about changing it to mixed business or mixed residential, and they wanted to build mostly residential in that area, and we kind of turned it down because we would like to see businesses there too as well. So I'm just trying to follow the intent of what the mixed residential is for.
So just to back up a little bit, that area that you're talking about was where there was Jack Young's proposed development.
Lot 3.
Right,
Yes,
on the other side, and that area is classified as a general commercial right now.
yes,
And so, yeah, the mixed residential, I think, would support that, but I think the concern on that is that it's general commercial, if one thinks residential in there, right?
yeah.
Okay. So that, yeah.
I just felt like there was a little bit of clashing of, is mixed residential really for residential for higher density? Or is it for a mixed use?
Well, the intent paragraph for MR mixed residential talks about diverse mix of housing options to higher densities, as well as supporting services and other compatible uses. It does mention that, but
So when you look at the table though, and start looking at the uses that you can have. We just, like the arts and crafts studio is not allowed, and the personal services isn't allowed, and offices aren't allowed, so. But when we had a discussion about the home occupation, it sounded like maybe that would cover more of those things.
I guess I agree with you that
Yeah, because I think part of the mixed residential actually addresses a live-work situation, which is a little bit more than just a home occupation.
right.
If you're actually gonna have a storefront downstairs and house upstairs or something like that. So we may need to expand the services allowed in the mixed residential, I think is what you're saying, to include services and some other.
Well, honestly, I mean, I'm embarrassed to think about it, backpedaling to the arts and crafts studio category. It probably makes sense for that to be in mixed residential.
My recollection was that mixed residential was to be a higher density residential and would allow other uses like a coffee shop or a real estate firm or some offices that complemented the residential. It's not, we never spoke of live work, but that would also work.
Yeah.
But it was more like having
So
service businesses within the density. Like for instance, a daycare. Where a daycare might not be allowed in a residential zone or high density zone. So I believe the intent was that to have high density and have the mixed use would be services for that type of density to make it more appealing. Like a little, not a convenience store, but some type of little grocery store or coffee shop or.
I thought
Would
mixed
it
residential-
live work also?
Yeah,
fit
I
into
would-
the mixed residential, and so that, I think that's where the concern is that we need to include some more services type thing, uses in the mixed residential as per the table.
well, unless just the home occupation rule covers it.
I see mixed residential as multiple densities. Maybe, live work, but not commercial or public interfacing.
And so if you read the definitions, that other document, the last document, the definitions document, it actually says as a mixed use site is used for a mixture of commercial, industrial, and residential.
But if we say mixed use residential, does that preclude? I don't,
Well, and it's funny because retail stores are a conditional use in MR right now. according to the chart. So, and I think this is all up for, I mean, these are all up for debate, right? Retail stores, conditional use. Interestingly, outdoor guiding is used by right. Health, recreation, and exercise establishment are used by right. Nursing homes, bed and breakfast are conditional uses.
But daycare,
Childcare is a conditional use.
so I think it should be all used by right. If we're gonna have high density apartments, I mean, a childcare would fit like a glove.
Well, I think the reason it's conditional use is because the devil's in the details. We want it, but we need to know where it's going,
I agree
what the criteria are.
how it fits, how it parks,
What's that?
how it fits and how it parks.
Yeah, right, exactly. So
And daycare has a drop off and pick up deal, so it has a lot, there's times a day when it's a pretty intense use. So I think conditional use is appropriate.
do Katie or TJ have any thoughts in response to Jennifer's concerns?
I would need your input on that one only because as I was listening, I was going through the existing requirements for that district and then what we put in there and it seems to match what we so we didn't make changes. So if you wanted to allow more uses, it would just be, we would need your direction, so. Or to change the purpose statement, but I feel like that's not something that you're looking to do because you worked hard on that in the past. So, but I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, I'll jump back in and say my concern would be that there's probably, this should be a part of a larger conversation about where the appropriate level of various uses should be, not necessarily just a mixed use or mixed residential conversation. Yeah, just I don't know the unintended consequences of anything we might do at this time.
I think it's a bigger conversation also.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and then in the definitions, I think the definition you read was for mixed use site.
yes,
That's different than mixed residential.
right.
So I think that,
But we don't have a mixed residential definition. It's just mixed use site.
Those are mixed residential.
we don't have a definition, but we have a intent paragraph. that I
Yeah,
think
the
is-
intent paragraph.
But this is another one for the revisiting. Sounds like the parking lot, yeah. Good catch. Katie, what did you find on that section 5, table 5.1 and right-of-way vacation?
Oh, I made a note and then I was gonna look into it after the meeting, but I can check. Sorry, I was busy listening and I was afraid
know,
I
we're-
lose track.
We're putting you in a tough position making it.
No, that's okay. I can definitely scroll through really quick and find it here.
And then I just had a question on the chapter 7, section 6. The first page, or yeah, down at the bottom, eligibility, it says a PUD should not be permitted on a project area of less than. And then it looked like it said 25 acres, but then it changed.
No, it was 5 acres and it was changed to 2.
Okay,
Right.
that's where I was confused. Okay. That was just a clarification. That's good. And then my last question was, so the moratorium ends July?
14th, if we meet the timeline that they've thrown up. previously. So we would have to approve, and there'd be the 2 readings by council. And after the second reading would be 1 month, so July 14th would be the end of the moratorium, assuming we approve and stay on schedule, so.
And are we expecting a lot of applicants once that starts up again? Do you think?
I don't have a good answer to that. It's hard to tell. I know there's been there's been a few conversations, but I don't have a good gauge on if folks are lined up, ready to submit on, July 14th or July 31st earlier of, so yeah, I don't have a pulse on that, a solid pulse.
Okay. I just didn't know if our meetings were gonna be bombarded.
I have a question. If this is going to city council on May 10th, a couple of weeks from now, will we get a comprehensive copy to review before that meeting, or maybe a red line copy from stem to stern, or something like that that we can read before that meeting?
A red line copy of the code changes?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
It was just through the last one. I'd like to see one document where it reflects all the changes, or just one document that I can read through reflecting it all.
I was telling Jack, I think the problem with that is that there was a meeting earlier this year where Katie said, you know, if you guys are willing to accept the changes up to this date, I will do accept changes, and then you'll see the changes from here on out. And that's probably the document she's now been working on. So I don't know if a document exists that includes all the changes from day one. Because we agreed to approve the changes thus far.
Sure, and it very well may, Katie can chime in on that, but
I'd love to
it would
see
get, it would be tough to look at with the sea of red and green, given that things have been removed, added, switched to other sections, so I don't know Katie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, we could make it so you could see them all in track changes, but I can't imagine trying to read it with all the edits.
Really? Well, can we get one that's maybe not redlined that we can read? It's for the proposed document that's going to the town on the 10th.
That's
It's
this,
the whole-
that's the, right now. Well, with the changes to see.
Well, and I would imagine if we
So you
make
can
the
do-
motion, we'll say with the changes discussed.
And then that will receive that updated document before May 10th.
It'll be available the Friday before at the latest.
You gotta be available in the town council.
I think it is Friday night.
Well, what else you got?
Wait for Preston to email me.
Does anyone else have any comments? John, you've been saving yours to the end?
No, I'm pretty happy.
John's been quiet all night.
I think we might be there.
Uh-oh, now what do we do?
Katie throws her recommended motion up on the board so that someone can read it
I think
and add on with the changes discussed.
Do you want me to do a quick final review of what I have as notes to change? Not to put it specifically in the motion, but just to make sure I have it accurate. Is that okay? I don't want to take up your time, but I want to make sure I have it, that I'm not missing anything here
We
on
can
you.
remember what they all were.
Yeah. All right. So number one would be, we are adding childcare as a conditional use in the HB district. We are adding laundromats as a conditional use to the GC district. We are allowing manufactured homes wherever single family residences are allowed in the land use table.
I'm sorry, say that again, please.
Manufactured homes will be permitted by right where single family homes are permitted by right. And that will be reflected in the land use table. And then we are changing the sentence regarding throughout the code where we have 20% metal, we're changing it so it's not an accessory or secondary material. It'll be changed and noted as 50% on a structure. And we are, next one is table 5.1. I did verify, thank you for catching that. The right-of-way vacation, the narrative and how it should be is going to Planning Commission for recommendation, and that Planning Commission is not checked off in table 5.1. So I'm going to add Planning Commission to the right-of-way vacation. And then those were the actual code changes that I'm making. And then just so you know, I have 4 marks of things I'm going to emphasize on that table of future discussion items that we really want to make sure are clear in there and make sure that they're coming out clearly. So.
Great.
I guess the only question I had was there any additional review on that monolithic structure in the U-Rod?
I guess.
Were we gonna look at that again, or? I'm not saying that it needed changing, but that was one of the things we talked about.
Whether it needs to be called out specifically in the UROD.
Or, yeah. Yeah.
See if there's a conflict between how it's written in UROD and the design standards, I can add that.
Yeah, just a review on that. I'm not saying it needs to be changed, but just a glance at that, make sure we're comfortable with it.
Perfect, got it.
Preston,
Adding it, I should say.
when the list for future discussion gets updated, could you throw it in our Dropbox or send it to us?
Yep, we can do that.
Thank you. So how that works is that town council will prioritize those items and then send us the directive to work on them as prioritized, or do we have a say in that as well?
For the discussion that's being here for council.
For both, ultimately, it comes down to town council direction as they formulate the strategic plan and the work plan each year. And consider the cost implications. So, but certainly they would solicit the input from the planning commission.
Okay, so if they want our input, maybe it could go on our agenda, but I'd like to see the document, whether they want our input or not.
They always want our input.
Sometimes they get it anyway.
I have a question. Has Bo finished his review?
Of
Because
this.
there was at least one, I'm looking at Katie's notes from an email, I don't know, a week or so back. Chapter 7, section 8, going to legal review and moving forward after final edits are made. And then the last bullet point was there are still a few comments in the document asking for confirmation from the towns on if the proposed definitions are sufficient. Are those been addressed, Katie?
Yeah, well, no, I think we're still waiting. We are still waiting for Bo to put his eyes to, those were in the annexation section, to that section.
Okay, I think the last bullet was just throughout, or maybe just definitions, I don't know.
Bo,
Just annexation is the only one we're waiting on him to verify for us.
yeah, so Bo, prior to the chapter 7 update initiative or project, had ends a standalone section for annexation. So what TJ and Katie have done is they've taken that section that Bo penned and modified it, I think, at least a little bit, and just wanted to make sure it was done appropriately and just get his eyes to it. I think we're confident that he'll be pleased with it largely.
Is it gonna be part of chapter 7?
Yes.
So we're gonna annex it into chapter 7.
Yep, correct. It's
Section 8.
7, chapter 7, section 8.
So the annexation's been annexed.
There's a suggested motion on the screen.
Well, sorry, Chair, if I might just add a little bit more to that Preston and I have had multiple verbal conversations with Bo on the language and the intent, and we're confident that the annexation language that we've changed is going to be fine by him. We just haven't gotten the written responses, and if you know attorneys, that's not all that surprising. But no, to Preston, I mean, we have had multiple conversations in our regular updates with the whole team, where Bo has seen those and participated in those. So I just want to give that reassurance as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'll make a motion that the planning commission recommend to town council that they adopt the proposed code amendments to chapter 6, building regulations, chapter 7, planning and zoning, and chapter 8, licensing, with the modifications to chapter 7, sections 4 and 5, as discussed here tonight.
I'll second that.
John moved. Jennifer seconded. Can we please get a roll call vote?
I think we can do it all. We can-
Oh,
all in favor?
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? The motion passes unanimously, and I move, the meeting is adjourned.
Katie and TJ, go have a glass of champagne.
Thank you.
Thank you for your feedback and especially the catches you made on our discrepancies. I really, really appreciate that. So thank you.
It's a
Thank you all, good work.
Oh, it
Enjoy
takes a
your
lot of
snow
eyes
tonight.
on to see everything. Thank you, guys.
Thank you again. It's been a great process.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.